does that list sit? Where is it?
So the list is in the proposed version which has been put to the panel, and it was actually based on a contribution from Fletcher's in their submission. So the structure and the approach of the list is based on their contribution, and it's essentially been refined to match close to Homestar 6, so with a few minor modifications essentially from the list they put forward in their submission.
And I'm assuming that list is available, it's in the evidence? And
correct, it's in the evidence, yeah.
And how do we go about changing that list as,
Well, hang on.
things change over time?
Councillor, this is just where we went to before. Remember, this is the process we've gone through at the unitary plan meetings where we discussed this at length. We were then updated on our mediation position, changes were made. This now sits as the evidence that we took to the panel. When the panel then brings its recommendations to us, we'll decide to accept or reject the decisions of the panel. So that's the process as is.
Okay, got another question then, and that's just around the evidence suggesting that the office building market is regulating itself. I'm assuming that evidence is available.
Essentially, I believe that evidence, I didn't have direct contact with the office at the moment, but I think the evidence was entirely anecdotal. But essentially, you can observe in the market today that the offering being provided, a large proportion of it is taking up Green Star.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Just picking up on one point there, and thank you for this information. You talked about a $6,000 build cost. That's at the outset. So surely there must have been another part of that equation too, considering the building code. It talks about a 50-year life of what you build. So what were the benefits that were considered over the 50-year lifetime? Was that thought about in determining the $66,000 upfront cost?
Yes, so essentially two separate studies were undertaken. We conducted the first, which was to look at what would you have to build to meet Homestar 6, and therefore consequentially what would it cost. A second study was carried out which looked at the payback period, so that was savings on energy, on water, anything that came out of that increased standard. And I believe that's in the evidence record as well, and that it effectively established how many years it would be before the payback was achieved.
Okay, it's good. It's been considered. And for John, I'm just a little bit confused here. Thank God it's 101 learning here. So at the regional policy statement level, the first couple of slides covered that, and then we switch into the panel's feedback on that. Just trying to, and the interim guidance on the quality built environment, which is B2.2, and then we go into our changes and new position at the hearing. But that new position wasn't at the regional policy statement level, was it? That was at a subset level. So am I correct in that regard?
Yeah, that's correct. So it's that situation that we talked about before, that there's potentially a need for the regional policy statement to change, and I can't recall off the top of my head whether we suggested that these objectives and policies on the screen now should change. It's the key one is that all large-scale development. Now, obviously, by deleting and it says require all large-scale development. So our change to the rules is not consistent with that policy now. Yeah. And I'd have to check, because normally what we do, if in a later hearing, you sort of get more evidence and things are tested a bit more, and you find out, well, actually, we can't justify all large office buildings being required to achieve a sustainable, best practice sustainable design. Normally what we do at that later hearing is say a consequential change is to go back into the RPS and make some changes to this policy. So this was our policy at the RPS hearing. 6 or 9 months later, we're in the nitty-gritty of the sustainable design rules. We decided there wasn't evidence to justify the office rule. We should really have signalled a change to this, and I can check that because we probably did. Normally we did that. Quite often we had to say, this has got a consequential change back up into the RPS, and here's what the change should be.
But that might come through in the recommendations. We might see a change in the RPS in those two categories.
The panel would definitely be looking at consistency from the regional
Yeah.
policy down into the rules, and that's why I think the question before is if they've locked in the regional policy statement, is that it? I think it was Mark, you asked that. Well, it's not. They're continually, it's probably one of the reasons that they haven't released recommendations on the regional policy statement yet, even though we know that they've done a lot of thinking around that, because those hearings finished over a year ago, is that they have to hold it in case they have to go back in again.
And some words interest me there, and it leads through to this whole conversation about density, which comes further down the plan. And that's under the quality built environment, in the second line there, maximising resource and infrastructure efficiency. So I gather when we're talking about maximising resource, we're talking also, amongst other things, we're talking about maximising the resource of land. Would that be a fair interpretation? It's mentioned under climate change and quality built environment.
Yeah, I think the objection policies around efficient use of land probably have their own suite of objection policies in the RPS around growth, tying into things like the 70% growth within the existing urban area. Those sorts of, there's quite a detailed policy framework around land efficiency. My reading of it is quite a specific one around, energy use and water use and those sorts of resources rather than land. I mean, you could interpret it either way, but I just know there's another chapter of B2 that deals with growth more broadly and land efficient use of land. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Casey.
Oh, mine's just an easy question. The key stakeholders were divided into two groups, those that supported the council's position and sought expansion of retaining the urban design rules, or those who wanted them deleted. Which camp was Housing New Zealand in?
I think they wanted to be in the deletion.
I thought they might.
In the hearings, they interestingly brought a lot of evidence that actually backed up the council's position, which might have been unintentional. But they talked about the cost-benefit work that they've done themselves. They've talked about the reasons why they invest in the fabric of their buildings for the benefit of their tenants. And they talked about it being worth their while paying to do so. And they did so in quite unequivocal terms that it was of great value to them. And there's been a lot of work put into why they do that, and interestingly, even right down to very technical details, specifics of how you build floors, specifics of how you deal with ventilation and windows, things which in some cases are not actually covered in the building code in any real detail. They are very close to the council's position in the requirements that we put in.
And they wanted them deleted?
They wanted the homestyle mechanism certainly deleted in terms of costs of registration they perceive as a large asset holder. But in terms of performance standards, they were basically saying that operationally they're in the same place.
They can use the list, comply with the
Councillor
list.
Quacks.
Yeah, thank you. I noted that you stated you thought it added about $6,000 to the cost of the house. The construction industry think it costs more, don't they?
There was quite a range of information in submissions from Fletcher's, Housing New Zealand, and I think one other source. And in some cases, it was actually less than our estimate.
Right.
So it was a spread, yeah.
Yeah. And even if it was $6,000, that's actually, if you pay that in your mortgage over a 20-year period, it actually almost doubles that, doesn't it?
That's typical of any housing purchase, yeah.
And for my edification, what are some of the things that you include to get a Homestar rating of 6? What are some of the things?
Well, if I might just reference, as we talked about, it's in evidence, but the key issues that are in the elemental schedule, which was provided as an alternative route, are essentially insulation, ventilation, lighting efficiency, and one very specific provision to avoid import of unregulated tropical hardwood, which is a significant issue in equatorial countries where high-grade wood is logged in rainforests. So, but the main focus is on the stuff that consumes or keeps the energy in the house.
So it doesn't include anything like gardens or or trees or stuff like that, or water type
So-
heating or anything like that?
So the Homestar tool does include a whole suite of items, and one of the attractions for developers is it gives them a lot of flexibility. You can pick and choose what you want to emphasise. There are core standards in Homestar, and the list that we've got as an elemental alternative is basically very close to those core standards. It's the heat, it's the moisture, it's the ventilation, it's the health issues.
And they're audited as the building goes ahead?
Correct. In Homestar they are, yes.
Again, all of that, I would imagine, is in the evidence that we can look up. Okay, quick question, councillor Walker, because we've just gone over 4:30.
Sure. Do we consider how what's panning out here fits with our low carbon action plan, that is the council's targets, and obviously our targets are designed to sync in part with government targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing carbon?
Yes, I think John touched on the alignment with the regional policy statement there. And essentially, because buildings are a large consumer of carbon, not the largest element in Auckland, but they have a substantial impact. So any conservation of energy through this type of approach is going to have a consequential impact on carbon emission, essentially, in material production and consumption.
So I'd find some background to this in the evidence?
In the evidence, we cross-reference a lot of international and New Zealand studies on carbon intensity of products and carbon associated with energy use in buildings.
Right, I think we might be... John, anything you need to add?
No, that's all good, thanks.
Okay, can I just say thank you to everyone. I think that was a bit of a slog through some pretty detailed information, but thank you to our staff, our specialists who've given us the information, and to our team who are here. Thank you very much.
Before we finish, and I wonder if Catherine might be able to give us a bit of advice on this. Presumably the council is going to provide a submission to the urban,
The
policy
NPS.
statement?
We've got that coming up, councillor. There's a workshop that councillor Darby will be chairing next Thursday, councillor, and the NPS is on. We're discussing the NPS at that workshop, and we will be providing a submission on that.
Yeah, so because that submission will probably traverse a number of issues that are in the unitary plan, how are we going to deal with that?
So we've had a little bit of thinking around that, and it needs to be, I'd like us to be able to discuss that at the workshop, but obviously our position is clear so far without making any statement or advocacy around our position. We can deal with the concerns or support that we have for the NPS. So obviously Catherine and the team are giving that some thought.
So Catherine, what is the situation with somebody, an elected member, making a personal submission?
To the, in relation to the call for,
Policy statement, yeah.
in terms of the ordinary rules of conflict, if any member was deciding to make a personal submission when the matter was before council deciding what council's submission might be on that NPS, on the ordinary rules, the councillor would stand aside on the basis of a conflict of interest. Having made a personal submission, you would, if you were adopting a sort of prudent approach, you would stand aside from council's decision-making about its submission on the NPS.
Yeah. Well, because it sort of raises the question, because once a submission is made, it's made as a collective of the council, a collective opinion of the council. Is that right?
That's right.
So what is the difference?
It is a different scenario from what we've largely dealt with in the conflict of interest context, is if, for example, somebody's made a submission on the unitary plan and then sitting here as a decision maker. The strength of the rule is that in that scenario you would stand aside. Normally a councillor, I think under the Auditor General's guidelines, makes the point
This
around...
This is not a submission on
No.
the unitary plan, so, this is, but related to the unitary plan.
It's related to the unitary plan. I think in the context of when a submission, if a member wished to make a personal submission on the NPS, we're very happy to talk with them separately about how best to manage that, any conflict that might arise, and how to preserve the integrity of the unitary plan decision process, so that any comments that were made on the NPS weren't seen as putting a predetermined line in the sand. That it all turns on the timing of it, because if you were making a submission on the NPS before you're coming to decision making on the unitary plan, there's quite a lot of complexity in that space that we'd want to give good guidance on how to manage that, which would turn on the content of the submission.
That's why I think, Councillor, it's good that
That
we have
Meredith
the chance
Connell-
to talk to. Councillors, I don't think we should play fast and loose with this critical process.
Well, I don't think anybody's playing
no,
fast
I'm
and
just-
loose.
Get that Meredith Connell advisor in.
No, I'm just taking exception, Councillor Quacks. I think you raise a very good and legitimate point, and understand quite clearly the gravitas of the situation. Councillor Lee, I hope you're not being light-hearted about the need for legal advice on this, because we do not want to put this
The Meredith
huge
Connell
project.
that declared their own conflict of interest.
Oh, for goodness
I'm
sake,
sorry.
you're such a nasty man.
Councillor Quacks,
You are
thank you.
such a horrible person at times, Councillor Lee.
Councillor Quacks, thank you for raising the question. I'm sure it will be traversed at the workshop for those people who choose to take these issues seriously and understand the legal implications sensibly. Thank you. Declare the meeting closed.